Ever wonder what's actually going on during the hybrid Entra join process? Why is it taking forever sometimes for these devices to finish its hybrid configuration? Find out on this MS Cloud Bros video. Hey, Jeremy Wallace here, Microsoft Certified Trainer and Azure Solutions Architect Expert, and today we're going to take a look at the hybrid Entra join process. It is a critical process for things like when you're setting up Intune enrollment, or if you're doing a self-service password reset for your hybrid join devices. The hybrid join part is going to be essential in that setup. And even though it's something that Microsoft ultimately recommends getting away from, their official recommendation is to go the Entra joined only route. So your cloud join only, get away from Active Directory. The reality is a lot of organizations need to stick with the hybrid join process. One of the things that I've had to explain a lot lately is kind of accounting for that delay. What is the process going on for that Entra join to happen? And honestly, there are a lot of moving parts that go, and it can be a bit of a delay to see devices initially show up to the point that they can get, Intune enrolled inside the Azure portal or Entra portal because of some of the processes that are going on here. So we're going to dive into that here. I have it diagrammed out. We're looking at some of the Microsoft documentation, everything to help explain that. So let's dive right in. We're going to start with the first point that usually everyone is going to do is configure Entra Connect sync for that hybrid join. And so if you're setting that up, the screen that you should be familiar with, or that you should hit if you're going to be setting this up, is something like this. It's the SCP configuration, the service connection point. So you're going to select the domain that you're going to store this SCP in. And the SCP, the service connection point, it's nothing big, nothing fancy. It's not an agent or appliance. It's just literally a string of information that is stored in Active Directory. You can see down here. It's stored in the configuration partition. This is an example of what it looks like, and it's going to have the string of information. That's all the service connection point is. Nothing fancy. It's not a job that's running. It's just some information stored in Active Directory. So it's going to create that. The other step you're also going to do is select OUs. If you're not syncing all of the OUs in your Active Directory, which hopefully you're not, because there's a lot of OUs that do not need to be synced. But for Entra hybrid join to work, you're going to need to select OUs that the computers themselves are. And you're most likely already synchronizing users for, Microsoft 365 and things like that. But we're also going to need the computer object itself synchronized, and you're going to see why that's needed here in a bit. So if we go back down, so step one, we've set up that service connection point. We've set those OUs to synchronize those computer objects. And so now that information is waiting inside Active Directory for us. Now, on the computer side, your Windows 11, Windows 10 devices, if they're domain joined, they're constantly running something called the automatic device join task. That's built into Windows. And when it's domain joined, it'll start kicking off every time a user signs in to their profile. And then it's supposed to run on an hour interval. So while the user sign in, every hour, that automatic device join task is supposed to run. So the SCP is in Active Directory. User signs into the domain joined device. Automatic device join task runs, and then it's going to query, it's going to do an LDAP query to Active Directory asking for some information that resides in the SCP. If that service connection point information is there, Active Directory is going to respond with that string of information. Then the next time the automatic device join task runs, and so you already begin to see why this can take some time, because we're relying on this automatic device join task to run upon user sign-in or every hour interval. So the next time that automatic device join task runs, it's going to then create a self-signed certificate that will be stored on the computer, and it's going to do an LDAP write to Active Directory to fill in that user certificate information on the computer object. So again, Automatic device join task runs, requests SCP, Active Directory responds with SCP information. The next time automatic device join task runs, it then creates a self-signed certificate and writes a value to the user certificate attribute on its computer object in Active Directory. From there, that information is on the computer object. It's going to get picked up by your Entra Connect sync. Remember, that runs by default on a 30-minute interval typically. And so the next time the sync runs, and this is why you need to have the OU actually syncing, because if you don't have the OU that the computer object is in being synced, none of this information is ever going to get to Entra or Azure. It's just gonna sit there. So if you have problems with this process, number one thing to check right off the back, are you actually syncing the OU that computer's in? Or you may be thinking you are, but maybe that computer actually isn't in that OU. So go find where it's at in Active Directory. Okay, so Entra Connect Sync discovers you have the user certificate attribute written now, discovers that change. It's going to then, on that next sync, send the user certificate, object GUID, and computer SID information to Azure DRS. That's the Azure Device Registration Service. So Azure DRS takes that information and writes to Entra ID and creates that actual device object, essentially the corresponding computer object that you see inside the Entra portal. It's going to have that user certificate attribute information written to that object as well. Okay. So now back to the computer. Now the next time the automatic device join task run, again, that's going to be on user sign-in or every hour on the hour while the user signed into their profile. It's going to then try to complete the registration by reaching out to Entra ID and authenticating to it using its self-signed certificate, which Entra has the information for because that information was synced up through Azure AD Connect or Entra Connect. Once authenticated, Entra is going to issue an ID token to the device. I realize that is here. We'll get the arrow down here so we can see that it's actually going to the device. Okay. So ID token issued to the device. The next time automatic device join task runs, again on user sign-in or next hour interval, it's going then to then create a certificate request. And it's also going to create a key pair, one key pair that's going to be involved in the certificate request, and then another one using the TPM storage root key to actually do a transport key for this request. It's going to send all of that information to Azure DRS. Azure DRS is going to then update the object in Entra ID, and that's when you see the object go from pending to registered inside the Entra portal and the Azure portal. So up until then, you'll typically see the device object there. When it did the first part, you'll see the computer listed. It says join type. I think it still uses the terminology hybrid Azure AD joined. And then under registration, it's going to say pending. And it's not until it does this part where it sends the certificate request up that Azure DRS then reaches out to Entra ID to say, hey, this is no longer pending. It's completed its route. This is now a registered hybrid Azure AD joined device. Then, at the same time, Azure DRS sends a device certificate to the actual device, and that device then stores that device certificate inside the computer personal store, and voila, your device is now completely Entra joined, hybrid joined, at Entra Azure AD hybrid joined. So that whole process can take a variable amount of time depending on how many times the user signs in during that process, how long they're signed into their profile during that process, so that that automatic device join task can run. And you can see that it needs to run several times. So if all of a sudden runs only once at the end of the day, and then they shut down their computer, they take it off the network, and, it's not logged until the next day. Then when they sign in, then it's going to complete the next part of the process, and then you have to wait till that device join task runs again to complete the next part. So each of these parts depend on that sign in task interval to run. And so it can be a while before those devices fully show up as actual registered, ready to go devices in the Entra portal. There are some details that Microsoft provides in their documentation that I may have kind of summarized here, but if you want to know some of the nitty gritty, I think I covered most of it. A little bit different in a federated environment if you're having to do with ADFS and things like that. I'll put all the information in the description of this video. But yeah, that is the hybrid join process.